Greetings. This is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm not going to waste a lot of time because we have got so much to talk about. And I think we'll have to start with last night's debate. You're listening to this or watching this on September 30th. The debate was last night, September 29th. Should we even call it a debate, Chuck?
No, it was neither presidential nor a debate. I did think, though, that Joe Biden did what he had to do, no more and no less. And so I think he came out the winner. And primarily because he's running as the guy who's going to end this Trump nightmare. And so he just had to be competent. Standing next to a fourth grader who has no self-control in a classroom where the teacher can't control him. I mean, that's what it was. And it was difficult to watch. I think I've been telling folks today who've been asking me about it that if I didn't have this show to do today, I would have turned that debate off after 5 minutes. It was darn near unwatchable. It was uncomfortable. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating. And it was sad. I mean, it was disappointing and sad.
Yeah, I mean, do you blame Chris Wallace for not being able to control? I don't know what he could have done. He doesn't have the power to turn off the microphone. I hear rumors that the debate commission might be talking about that for, the future debates.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Chris Wallace has been taking a lot of heat for it today. But, as you indicate there, the real question is, what else could he have done? I mean, he admonished Trump, I don't know how many times. It was over and over and over. Even took the time on national television to say to the president, your team agreed to these rules. Why won't you follow the rules? And, please allow your opponent to speak. So, I think he was in an impossible situation where you have the president of the United States just disregarding the rules and any of the decorum that you would expect in a debate. I don't know what else he could have done because I don't know what consequences he could have indicated might happen were Trump not to follow the rules. I don't know if he had the power to limit the amount of time he could speak. Certainly, as you say, he did not have a microphone kill button, which may have to be installed for the next ones. I don't know. But I don't know what else he could have done.
I don't either. And it was really bad. Of course, some of his supporters are saying, oh, he's forceful. This is how strong he is. This is how he gets things done. I just don't know that that's going to be popular outside his base.
Well, I think some of the day after polling shows that I think only, depending upon which poll you look at, I saw a couple of them today indicating that only 26 to 28% of people thought that Trump did well or won, and the rest thought it was Biden's win. And I mean, that's really abominable if you're the incumbent trying to convince whoever's left as undecided to come to your side. I don't think he gained any votes at all. Yeah. I don't think he lost anything from his base, but he needs more than his base to win.
I do think that, Biden did miss a few opportunities that I think a sharper debater would have done. When he's talking about, for instance, the forest fires here, because we won't rake our forests, what is left out, nobody challenges him on this, is that 58% of the forests in California are federal. If he wants to rake them, he can rake him. Secondly, I was a little disappointed that Biden didn't hit back on the 128 judges where, I had to fill in 128 spots when I came in. That's not good. Well, that's because, the Senate with the Republican majority shut it down for the whole year. He says, he's like saying, well, if you had your way, I'd only have 3 years. Well, what he's getting is 5 years of appointments, basically. Right. So that's why he's breaking these wonderful records. And, I mean, there were a number of things like that where I wish that Biden had sort of come back with that. But, when you're up there and you're dealing with this, it's really hard. There was one moment where Biden actually, because he's probably been practicing not to lose his cool, and he said, you can't even get a word in with this clown. And then all of a sudden he realized I shouldn't have said clown. He said this person, right? But it was a completely human and understandable moment. I don't fault him for that. And but in the meantime, a lot of the media that doesn't want to seem biased is like saying, well, he started to insult too. And it's like, no, his response was completely reasonable. If anything, he should have tried to interrupt more himself, maybe. I mean, it was just, but
I
he was
totally agree. One time he even said, "Why don't you just shut up, man?"
Yeah.
I agree. I think Biden came through it just fine. I also cringed with what Trump had to say about Joe Biden's deceased son, who served in the military. It's just the way Trump treats people like that is just inhumane and cruel. And I'm surprised that that's not disqualifying. But his base still sticks with him. I mean, they stuck with him through everything he had to say about John McCain. And now it's Joe Biden's son.
Right. Yeah, he completely bypassed. I don't know who Beau Biden is, but and went back at Hunter.
Right.
It was bizarre. But where he really may have messed up is when he was given a softball pitch.
Yep.
Will you condemn white supremacists? All you had to do was say, yeah, I condemn racism and white supremacy. He already did it once 3 years ago, but I think he doesn't want to jeopardize his voting base right now. So he didn't do it. And they were like, say, well, give me a name, an organization. And Biden said, how about the Proud Boys? And he said, okay, Proud Boys. And the most strangest thing said, stand back and stand by. I think he was probably supposed to say stand down, and he messed up. But I don't know. It was the strangest thing he did. And now the Proud Boys are all over. Of course, the Proud Boys, for those who don't know, are kind of a thinly veiled hate group. I'm sorry, that have initiation rights about getting into fights with left-wing demonstrators. That's part of what is required of them. And although they don't overtly say racist things too often, every once in a while something slips out, but it gives them a plausible deniability. So basically, they're on the light end of the Klan. I mean, it's and they're showing up and are causing a lot of the problems in Portland. They had that 600-car caravan along with Prayer Patriots, whatever they are, and they're like, we're ready to go. They may actually take action because of what Trump said. They're putting out T-shirts that say stand back and stand by. But Van Jones on CNN, he said there's only one thing of significance that happened tonight. He said Donald Trump refused to condemn white supremacy. The president refused to condemn white supremacy, and the commander-in-chief refused to condemn white supremacy. That is the story. There's really not much else to talk about as far as he was concerned. And that's, so is that going to have a negative impact on him? We don't know. Is this going to move the polls? Who knows? I don't know if there's much room for the polls to move at this point.
Yeah, I think in the polls, Trump is at the point where he needs almost 100% of the few undecideds who are left, and that's just statistically not possible. I think I agree with Van Jones. I agree with your assessment there. That was the most important thing. And, I think my overall takeaway, putting together his refusal to denounce white supremacy and white supremacist groups and the inhumane treatment of Joe Biden and so on, and Biden's son, and put together with the fact that he claimed that he had paid millions in taxes when it looks like he only paid $750 and zero in a lot of years. And I know we're going to get to that later. But overall, I think my takeaway is this. Donald Trump last night showed that he's running against the election itself. He knows he cannot win an election. So the standby part for the Proud Boys probably is foreshadowing what he's going to do after the election. He's going to declare victory election night, no matter what the numbers say. And prior to that, he's going to have people like the Proud Boys showing up at polling places to intimidate voters, which is illegal and has been illegal for decades and decades. But Donald Trump is running against the election. Last night, he did not want to talk about taxes. He did not want to talk about coronavirus. He didn't want to talk about $400 million that he might owe to somebody as being a national security problem. He didn't want to talk about the 200,000 people who have died from COVID-19. So he had to generate chaos to keep any of that stuff from getting discussed in any kind of detail. So to me, what it showed is that he's just running against the election itself.
And notice we're, what, I don't know, about 10 minutes into the discussion. We're not even discussing the substance of what was discussed because there really wasn't a lot of substance.
No. Well, what policies could he talk about?
Yeah.
He hasn't done anything on infrastructure. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, so he doesn't want to talk about climate change. The devastating tax information that was released by the New York Times pretty much shows that his whole persona is a fraud. So I can't think of a policy that he could talk about. The failed response to coronavirus? I don't even know what it would be. His support of white supremacists? What could he possibly talk about from a public policy standpoint? He has no interest in public policy, and he and the Republicans have shown that they have no interest in governing. So I agree. There was no policy discussed to any degree because he doesn't have a platform for the current election cycle. He hasn't talked about what he wants to do in a second term. And when asked about it, he doesn't have an answer. So there's really nothing for him to talk about in a neutral venue like that. His only safe place is in those bizarre rallies that he holds where the people who are supporting him are not interested in policy. They're only there to heap praise upon him. So that's his only safe place at this point. Do you agree with that?
I mean, that's where he feels comfortable. That's why he's putting people. That was the other thing. I was a little disappointed because he said, "Oh, we haven't had any problems with our rallies," and maybe strategically he didn't want to bring Herman Cain up, but Herman Cain probably died because of the Tulsa rally. Yeah. I mean, the timing is just there. Is almost too perfect otherwise, and the rates of infection went up in Tulsa after that rally. He needs to really be ready to say those things, and because those rallies are putting people in danger. That event he had for the RNC at the White House spread it. I don't care how many of them were tested. It was spread in that event. Period. Yeah. And the ones he's having, so we need to talk about that. The infections are back on the rise. I don't know if it's because the schools are opening or because we're starting to get into colder weather when the second waves of these things start to happen. I don't know. And considering the fact that they've cut back on testing in a lot of places, it's pretty remarkable that the test positive rates are increasing. The death rates are holding steady between 800 and 1,000 a day, and we've got. I mean, we have a pandemic, and he would just like to not discuss it at all. A lot of people would like to not discuss it at all. They tell you everything is about reopening and getting the economy moving again, which of course everybody wants to do. We've got businesses locally that are suffering and may not come back because of it. I certainly love to see it reopen, but we didn't have a national plan. A global pandemic is not something you leave to the states. It's just not. You needed a national plan where with coordination and providing the states the resources and the money to do it, and to providing the businesses the ability to get to reopen. Biden tried to get into that in detail, but Trump just kept interrupting him.
Well, one of the reasons there was not a federal response, let's recall that one of the first things Trump did when he came into office was to get rid of the pandemic response team that had been set up during the Obama administration. Just got rid of it. And then a pandemic arrived. So they had no way of responding because they got rid of the folks who were capable and all set up to do that. So that's one thing. The other thing, as you mentioned, and you're right, COVID cases on the increase in so many states right now as we're heading into the flu season. So, we're heading into the fall, we're heading into cooler weather. We know the flu season is on the way. And at the same time, we see more COVID cases arriving as well. So we're heading into some rough periods here.
Well, why don't we've talked a little bit about the taxes, and it doesn't show conclusively any type of tax fraud, although he is fighting that the audits for like 2005 to 2008, I forget exactly what years, and the only clue he gave to us in his response is the IRS hasn't been treating me right. I really would like to know what's going on there, but. But we do have enough to know that I think it was 10 out of the 15 years of these records that came. Some people think it's the niece Mary who might have given them to the New York Times. We don't know. The New York Times got them and the records. And I think for the last 2 years we have are for the first 2 years of his presidency, in which he paid $750 for each year in taxes. And for 10 of those, 10 of the previous 12, he paid nothing at all. Right. Of course, when this came up in 2016, he said, that's because I'm smart. And, I guess the rest of us are chumps, right? Because we have to pay taxes. I think that's going to be, an issue. Of course, a lot of his people in his base are going to say, well, that's why he's smart. That's why he's president. But what it also points to is maybe he's really not a good businessman. We've talked about this before, that, that this is he inherited a lot of money, and maybe he's been blowing his inheritance and keeping the money flowing with loans. Possibly loans. I mean, the whole theory is that he took out some shady loans in Russia, which is why they appear to have a hold on him. And one of the big things that stuck out with me is apparently he's got $100 million loan on Trump Tower, on the commercial portions of Trump Tower. He took out that loan in 2012. He has paid off no principal on it. He's only been paying the interest, and it comes due in 2022, right in the middle of what would be his second presidency. Was there any law that says people can't foreclose on him while he's president? I don't know, but he's about to lose that unless he comes up with some money. And although his profits have been increasing with regard to the hotels, because all these diplomats and foreign business people want to curry favor with them by using those hotels, it's in the maybe tens of millions, not the hundreds of millions. He needs to pay off that debt, so that does make him a national security risk.
Yeah. Oh, of course it does. And just one thing to add to that I think is interesting, and I believe that they're still working on this, but some of the financial reporters at Forbes magazine looked at the New York Times report. And it turns out that they had been working on some similar research, and they found some debt that Trump owes that was apparently not included in those tax returns. So some of the folks at Forbes magazine thinks that the overall debt is more than the $421 million that kind of totals up, and could be close to $1 billion. I think the Forbes figure is $1.2 billion. And yes, that is a national security threat of the highest order. In fact, if Trump were applying for a job in the federal government that required even the lowest security clearance, he wouldn't be granted that clearance. And here he is, the commander in chief. So, yeah, we need to know who owns that debt. Who does he owe that money to? And what would he be willing to do to get out from under that debt?
Somebody leaked a couple of years ago some taxes from the late 1980s, and one of the things they noted was that there was a big accounting of income based on interest, which indicates to some people that there was a cash flow, probably in the form of loans, that were in there because that same income wasn't present the year later.
Yeah.
He got money and spent it. And were those Russian loans? I mean, we're speculating, but it's just all of the things put together start to point to something like that. And yeah, I mean, I'm questioning whether or not one of the reasons Barr is acting as his private attorney is he may not be able to afford all of the attorneys that he needs to defend him. So obviously, the Department of Justice is his private firm on the tax on the dole, because I think he doesn't have the money.
What do you think Trump has something on Barr? I mean, why would Barr be doing that? He's risking his law license, isn't he?
Yeah, there's already moves to disbar him for what we do know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is at such a level. I normally, I mean, I don't look at an election and say that it's going to make that huge a difference. I think, when Reagan in 1984, I thought was going to make a bigger difference than it made, and Bush in 2004, I thought was,
Right.
a big, huge. But this is probably the most important election in my life,
Oh, of
at least in
course.
my adult life.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
what these numbers really show is that not only is this an important election, but I mean, if you look at some of those line items on there, either Trump is one of the worst business people in the history of business, or he's a tax cheat. And I don't think you can reconcile the numbers any other way. I mean, either he really did lose tens of millions of dollars year after year after year on things like casinos where the house is supposed to win, or uh, he's cooking the numbers or having somebody cook the numbers for him. I don't know how it could be. I can't
Yeah.
reconcile those things. What do you think?
It's got to be one or the other. I mean, there's no way he can be that clever to come up with all of the tax returns to be able to pay it if he's taking in money, unless he's hiding the money.
Right. Yeah. So where's the income?
But
Yeah. Right.
it really looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. A lot of people who have worked with him said he doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
So not that great a real estate, investor.
Yeah.
I think the idea is he came to the presidency to try to make some money, and apparently that's helping. But even those hotels aren't enough money. All
No,
the
no, and the other thing that makes me wonder about the millions, that the 400 million that he owes to somebody or multiple people or entities, is that a lot of the investments that Trump has happens to be in golf courses, which are notorious for being money losers, to put it mildly. I mean, they're absolutely cash dumpster fires. But they do seem to be, and there are people who've written about this, good places to launder money. And so I wonder, if we're going to find that some of this money has been laundered through not just Trump Tower and some of the property he owns in Florida, but also some of the Scottish golf courses that he's put his name on and things like that. And I think that some forensic accountant is going to be able to trace some of that. That's difficult to do, but I think they know that places like Deutsche Bank and a couple of the banks in Moscow and the Bank of Cyprus are long known as being places where some of that money funnels through. We also know that Deutsche Bank is one of the last banks in the world that will still do business with him. And so we'll see. I have a feeling this is not going to turn out well for Trump. Let's also remember that his kids, especially Eric and Don Jr., have said more than once that they get most of their money from Russia. They said that in the 2016 campaign. And so, there it is. It's, they're telling us who they are. It's up to us to recognize and get them out of office.
We're doing this show once a week until the election, so I think we're going to have plenty of time to talk about the Supreme Court nominee. But we did get a nominee since our last show, somebody who was probably going to make it through. Probably isn't a rapist, or anything like that. But very deeply religious and and has expressed opinions against Roe v. Wade and against affordable health care. So, what would you like to talk about that for now, and then we can get into much more detail as that story progresses over the next
Well,
few weeks.
a couple of things. Her name is Amy Coney Barrett, and
Hmm.
currently, she teaches law at Notre Dame, and she's been on federal appeals court. And as far as academics go, and her judicial record, she would be qualified, more conservative than what I would want. But nobody is questioning her academic or professional qualifications. The problem is that she's done a lot of writing on some of the most hot button issues, as you said, the Affordable Care Act, and also Roe v. Wade. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic. The Affordable Care Act will be argued before the Supreme Court on November the 10th. That's the week after the election. It looks as if the Senate wants to vote on her confirmation during the last week of October, so that she is seated on the Supreme Court prior to the arguments for the Affordable Care Act. And upwards of 20 to 30 million people would be impacted if the Affordable Care Act went away. Now, that would not happen right after the arguments. They usually don't hand down their decisions until the following June, but still, we'll still be dealing with this next year. So it just seems to me that it would be cruel. And I also worry about a whole host of other cases that could be overturned. And one interesting thing that I think people can follow on this in the near term, before we even get to the Senate confirmation vote, is what's going on the Democratic side in the Senate right now. The Democrats are trying to force a vote on a piece of legislation that would legislatively, by statute, preserve the protection of pre-existing conditions. Now, that's something that would get challenged, of course, but at least they're trying to do that. And we'll see what happens with that, but they are going to put up a fight. But this does highlight how important it is for the Democrats to take back the United States Senate, because this is only going to get worse if that does not.
I have to actually put part of the blame for where the Health Care Act is on the Democrats. They say that they neglected to include a severance clause. Severance clause is basically a statement that says if any portion of this act is deemed unconstitutional or otherwise unenforceable, the rest of it stands. They claim to have forgotten to put that in. I think they put it in because they were afraid of what would happen. They would lose the individual mandate, and then insurance companies would be stuck with having to insure people, and insurance companies didn't want that. It ended up happening anyway. It was supposed to be overturned at that point, but Justice Roberts said no. So you don't necessarily have to have a severance clause to keep it all together. And but I guess there's another angle on that same argument heading to the Supreme Court. So yeah, there's a good chance it'll be done. You're right; it'll happen mid-year. Plenty of time if the Democrats retake the House, Senate, and the presidency. To do something to fill it in, exactly. and this time make it constitutional. Exactly. They'll have to do it in a hurry. They'll probably have to kill the filibuster. I think the filibuster is probably, is probably on its in critical care right now because it's not being honored for the Supreme Court justices. Democrats kind of started it. They got some judges pushed through, but they weren't going to apply it to justices. McConnell just took that and said, "Well, yeah, I'm not going to limit it. You've made a mistake," and so now is applying it to just about everything. So and I don't think the Democrats are going to be in a mood to let it happen. I actually think what they should do if they want to have a filibuster is go back to the Jimmy Stewart days when you had to argue for, to keep doing it, because then it would be something of national attention. It's too easy to filibuster right now. And but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I do think that's what would happen. And the questions that are asked in November will probably give the Democrats a lot of clues as to how they do it. But they've got to win the Senate,
Oh,
and they've got to win the presidency, and they got to hold on to the House. Holding on to the House seems pretty almost certain. We do have a number of polls out. Most of the polls are very encouraging for Biden and for the Democrats in the Senate. And I think there may be a little bit of backlash of them going against their word 4 years ago with regard to rushing through a justice, because there's now been 2 polls in a row where Lindsey Graham is dead even with Harrison. And in South Carolina, there is a poll that's and I think it's Quinnipiac. I'm not sure. It's not a shadowy fly by night pollster. These are real ones that says that Trump and Biden are even in South Carolina. If that becomes a battleground state,
right.
I don't even see what Trump can do about that. Already now Texas is becoming a quasi battleground state. Already the Ohio, which 6 months ago you didn't think Biden had a chance in, he's actually ahead in lately. And he's actually in Ohio today. He went on a train tour from Ohio to Pennsylvania. They're spending money there because Biden is slightly ahead in that one. And we'll get into this more detail as we get close to the election, but there are only really 3 states in which Trump had an opportunity to mount an offense. And by an offense, I mean trying to win states that Clinton had won 3 years ago. And the 3 states they had in mind were New Hampshire, Nevada, and Minnesota. Looks like Minnesota's just not working out for him. I thought they were hoping that the rioting and such would do it. It hasn't done it. New Hampshire, there were a few polls that were kind of close, but they're not moving. Same with Nevada. I think Biden has slipped a bit with Latinos, even outside of the Cuban area. So that's cost him a few numbers in places like Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. But I think they're going to address that. And that, so the question is, Trump has to then hold on to the states that he won 4 years ago, but he's already pretty much given up on Michigan. So once he gives up on all those states, he's got to win everywhere else. He's got to hold on to Arizona. He's got to hold on to Florida. He's got to hold on to South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, where he's losing in, Pennsylvania, where he's losing in. It's hard to see how he wins the fair election here.
You're exactly right. That's a spot-on, correct analysis. I would add 1 state to that, and that's Georgia. I saw a poll late today, right before you and I started discussing this, that they're even. Biden and Trump are even in Georgia, and it looks like now more so than ever, one of those Senate seats in Georgia is going to go Democratic. But we'll see.
Looks that way.
So,
yeah.
So that's why I think what you just said, I think, is some of the explanation for what we're hearing Trump say. And here's what I mean by that. I think he knows, as you just outlined, that the numbers are against him, even in states like Ohio, even in states like South Carolina, Georgia, and in Texas, of all places. He knows that.
And we forgot to mention Iowa. That's close, too.
And Iowa. It looks like he's going to win Iowa. It looks like Joni Ernst may lose her Senate seat in Iowa. So he sees all this. And so I think that's why we hear him talking so much about the fact that he thinks that mail-in ballots are illegitimate, just all of them. And so I think what we're going to see is on election night, November the 3rd, I think that you will see Donald Trump come to the podium in the White House and declare victory and say that his attorneys are challenging all of the mail-in ballots that would otherwise be counted after November the 3rd, because those things have to be opened. You and I have talked about this before. It takes a while. As we know here in California, it takes a while to count the mail-in votes after Election Day. And that's just the normal process. But his only tack right now is to challenge mail-in voting as being illegitimate and strewn with fraud. And he will make sure that that gets to what he calls his Supreme Court. And his only gambit now is hoping that his 6-3 majority by then 6-3, will reinstall him as president, much the way the Supreme Court stopped the vote count in 2000 and installed George W. Bush. I think that's the only path to victory he sees at this point, and that explains what we're hearing from him.
Yeah, and those 8 ballots in Pennsylvania, a lot of things are being left out of his narrative and even some of the media narrative. First of all, that's a Republican county. So to the degree that any corruption is happening, it's a Republican-run election department. It was 8 votes, and then there was something about a creek. He said river last night. Oh, they're being thrown into the river. And yeah, he wants to basically cast doubt on mail-in votes. And actually now people are saying, a lot of people are saying, they're not going to put their ballot in the mail. They're going to drive it to whatever drop boxes, which is why there's a fight over drop boxes and how many of them we're going to have and how easy they're going to get to. Yeah. So
his only path to victory at this point, and of course, we know how quickly things can change in the year 2020. But at this point, I think he sees his only path to reelection is somehow delegitimizing a huge amount of the ballots and the vote process itself. That's his only pathway to reelection. And that also indicates to me that he might not be getting as much help from the Russians as he had hoped. Otherwise, he wouldn't be worried. So, we'll still see what happens. But I think the more desperate he gets, the crazier he's going to get, and the more things he'll try, because he knows he's not going to win the election just based on a referendum on Donald Trump. He's going to lose that big time.
I think the Russian effort, to the degree that there has been one, has probably been hampered by the fact that social media have actually been shutting down puppet sites. They're actually doing that. And I also think that the public does become educated about things, and maybe they're less susceptible to the memes that come across their screens when they're on Facebook. Maybe people aren't taking them as seriously as they did before. I also, one of the problems Trump has is it was okay for him to rant and rave when he was an outsider, coming in, everyone wanted to throw bombs when he got in here, but he's the president now. He's the status quo, and he's running like he's the challenger, and Joe Biden is the president, right? All of this division in these Democratic-run cities, well, it hasn't happened before. Not like this, not since, Martin Luther King was killed, if we had this much stuff. That's, supposed to be on who is responsible, but again, he doesn't take responsibility for things, and so is that wearing thin? Who are the undecided voters? I mean, I have pictures of them. There've been some skits on them on Saturday Night Live. Like they're the type of people that annoy waitresses by asking about everything on the menu for half an hour and then order a burger, right? I mean, what do they need to make a decision? What do they have to hear? And I almost wonder if half of them that end up in these focus groups on the network shows aren't even really undecided. They just said they were so they can get on television. Because I'm really having a hard time picturing anybody undecided. You either like this stuff or you don't. You either want some sense of normalcy or you don't. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right. And I think sometimes I think it's also true that in some election cycles, sometimes a certain percentage of the undecideds just give up and they don't vote. So that's possible. I think it's important as to where the undecideds are, and it seems to be that they're scattered all over. So there's really not one place where either Biden or Trump could go to make some last-minute pitch to them. The other thing is that Donald Trump is a known commodity, and so is Joe Biden. So I know that there are a couple of polls out there that show that undecideds nationally could be as high as 10 to 13%.
I don't believe that.
No, I don't either. And there are other polls that have been consistent since about the middle of the summer that the undecideds are down to somewhere between 5 and 8%. And that's about what Trump's deficit is right now. Today, just before you and I started talking, an aggregate of the polls indicated that Biden's lead is between 7.5% and 8%. If the undecideds are 5 to 8%, that means Trump would have to get 100% of the undecideds, and statistically, that's just not going to happen. Yeah. So I think that that Biden will probably win a fair election, but Trump will not accept it. I think that's the pathway that we're on.
Yeah. I mean, we know that even just to win the Electoral College, Biden probably has to win by at least 4 or 5 points, preferably even more, to have that. So, you know, and I know there's a big push by Democrats to get people. Usually Democrats tend to vote on election day, where conservatives tend to vote more earlier. There's going to be a big push from Democrats to vote early, so to see if we can alter that projection for election night when you know he might be ahead, and then argue later that it was stolen from him by everything else. I mean, he tried to misrepresent. This is one thing where Biden was clear on it. You know, he said, "Oh, some of them don't have to get their ballots in till November 10th." It's not the case. It's got to be postmarked by November 3rd, November 10th being the absolute last day for him, right? You know, and it's just, you know, and that's just to allow for the mail, which, you know, he's mismanaged. So it just, anyway, you know, there's some very interesting polls out there. Rasmussen is a right-wing, you know, Republican poll that skews towards Republicans to fire up the base until the last minute. They manage to preserve their ratings when they always, in the last couple of weeks, always head towards the crowd where everybody else is. Trafalgar is also even more biased, at least in terms of outlier polls, having Trump winning in places where all the other polls have him losing, and they have him up by 3% in Wisconsin. Most of the other polls have him up by 6 or 7%. Rasmussen today released a poll that shows before the debate that Biden was up 8%. And there were 2 other polls, and we're getting the Gold Star polls, you know, the Siena poll, and Fox News, by the way, are showing 8 to 10 point leads at this point. So it's been pretty consistent since June, up and down a little bit here and there, close and falling, but Biden is rarely falling behind in what we used to consider the battleground states, and he's opened up the battleground states. So if this is a fair election, you know, it's hard to see. Now, granted, there's a month away. Maybe there's some other October surprise, but we're not going to get, Durham's report before the election. He doesn't want to be any part of that, you know, on the Russia thing. So I don't know what else Trump has for an October surprise. The Hunter Biden thing was a dud. You know, the whole Ukraine thing. We're getting close, and we're going to have to do our predictions soon. But do you have any idea what Trump could do to turn it around legitimately?
Well, I think his October surprise is his Supreme Court nominee getting placed on the court by the end of October. I think that's all he has left. And just to put a fine point on your discussion there about the polls, when people are looking at national polls, you know, of course we need to remember that we have 50 state elections. But the people who analyze those polls statistically have been pretty consistent in reminding us that when you're looking at national polls, for Joe Biden to feel safe that he's going to win the election, he needs to be ahead in the national polls by above 3 to 4%. If he falls below 3%, there's a danger that the Electoral College math might work for Donald Trump. So if Biden can stay about where he is now, 7.5 to 8 to even 10% ahead, that's his safety zone. If he gets below 3%, then we're in danger of having a repeat of what happened in 2016. So people need to just keep an eye on that.
All right. We are getting towards the end of the show. It is time now for predictions. Would you like to go forward with a prediction?
Well, I think that his Supreme Court nominee will, in fact, be confirmed the last week of October and be sworn in and be seated on the Supreme Court prior to the Affordable Care Act arguments. And the reason that's important is that they want to make sure she's on the court before those arguments happen, so there'll be no question about whether she should recuse herself when the voting among the justices happens for that case next year. So I think that they will push through and they will confirm her before the election. I also think that it's likely that Americans are going to break a record through the end of October with their home and office pools, trying to figure out who Trump owes that money to, the $400 million. If I were buying a square on a pool sheet, I'd be buying Russia.
Yeah, or Russian banks. All right. Well, I want to go back to the debates briefly. Usually, the first debate is the most important debate. Hasn't always been, but usually it defines the rest. That's where a challenger or somebody makes a move. I don't think that this debate is going to make a huge difference in the polls. Maybe Biden will get a little bit of a bump, but I don't think it'll be measurable. I think it's going to hold steady with Biden holding anywhere from a 5 to 10 point lead throughout that. I don't think Harris and Pence will make a huge difference. I do think that actually the expectations game might actually help Pence where it helped Trump last night. So I think he'll probably come off as having held his own, but who knows, she is really good, and that'll be happening this time next week. And vice presidential debates, I don't think really have a big impact on it. I just don't think that the debates are going to turn around. That was the one concern. I think that the whole dementia argument is gone. Nobody's even talking about that after last night, except for maybe a few Fox News people. He, for crying out loud, he messed up on words, but he just couldn't get anything in. I was having a hard time finding words, and he wasn't interrupting me. So so I do think that if everything holds steady, there's not going to be any real change in this. And the longer the polls hold at this 8 to 10% leads, people are voting right now. So, even if there was something to happen like a Comey letter, people are voting a lot more, breaking records this time than they did with Clinton a couple of years ago. And the polls are actually more in Biden's favor than they were a couple of years ago, or 4 years ago. And Biden's approval rating is above 50. Clinton's never got above 50. So.
One thing to follow on that, I did read today, and maybe you saw this as well. A couple of reporters are trying to get a handle on exactly how many people have voted to this point, and they're hoping to track that, almost on a daily, certainly a weekly basis as we head toward the election. And as of right now, and as you said, we're just at the end of September here, they're already into the millions.
No, they are. And of course, in California, it opens up next week. It's we got stuff that reminds me really quickly. I do have my ballot proposition analysis ready. You can email me at ericvkirk at gmail.com. It's also available on Redheaded Black Belt. It got posted this morning. So
thank you for doing that. It's really well done. I read it, and it's very helpful. I encourage everybody to get it.
All right. We are doing these shows. We have this show comes on KZH on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock. And then we are on television, if you're not watching it right now, on Wednesday at 7:30 and Saturday at 8:30. And sometimes they use us to fill in other spaces on both the radio and Access Humboldt Channel 12. I want to thank Matt Knight for doing this. I'm getting some actually good feedback about the show. You can also email me anything you want us to talk about. But we will be back in 1 week. And Chuck, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.